Nicoline, hello.
Thank you so much. Thank you, colleagues. Yes, good afternoon again. On my clock, it is 1:10 now, so we're going to start the session. I'm Nicoline Herman from the Centre for Teaching and Learning, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this seminar. Prof Richard will do the formal welcome in a few seconds or minutes. So just to give you the format of the session, so firstly, Prof Richard will then introduce our speaker and the topic of the day. He will then hand over to our speaker, Professor Fataar, which will, for a roughly 30-minute presentation. And thereafter, we will have a Q&A session around the presentation. So you are welcome to post your questions in the chat while our presenter is busy, or otherwise, when we're in the Q&A session, you're also welcome to put up your virtual hand, and we'll take as many questions as possible. So thank you very much again for joining us here. We're really looking forward. And on that note, I'm handing over to Professor Stevens to introduce and welcome our speaker of the day. Over to you, Richard. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicoline.
Nicoline, this is Deline. I'm just checking. I don't know if I see Prof Stevens at the moment.
Prof Richard not in yet. Okay, then it's my privilege, Prof Fataar. So again, to all of you, welcome to this fourth Teaching Learning Assessment Seminar of 2025, which is offered by the Division for Learning and Teaching Enhancement under the auspices of the DVC Teaching and Learning. So we usually, during these sessions, invite people who are involved and engaged and busy with stuff in the teaching learning assessment arena to share their knowledge and experiences with colleagues. So on that point, today we're listening to the topic, the university classroom as a site of critical inquiry and possibility in the age of AI. And obviously that is very apt at this stage in higher education. Our speaker then is Professor Aslam Fataar, and I'm going to read a short bio to you. Prof Fataar is a professor in higher education transformation in the Department of Education Policy Studies at Stellenbosch University. A prolific scholar and dedicated teacher, and he is deeply committed to reimagining education in ways that transform both institutions and society. Today's seminar draws on a keynote that Prof Fataar delivered to the Senate of the University of the Western Cape, his alma mater, in August of this year. And then we could grab him to also come and share it with us. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
And today he will this presentation was also shared at a UNESCO summit, underscoring its global relevance. So the presentation problematizes current university functioning, where teaching is characterized by narrow knowledge reproduction. It examines how generative AI unsettles traditional pedagogy and assessment, while highlighting the urgent need for deeper intellectual and ethical engagement. At the heart of this shift is design-based learning and assessment, which replaces rote reproduction with dialogical, multimodal, and conceptually rigorous practices. Anchored in contrapuntal pedagogy and supported by the principle of epistemic ascent, the approach affirms the integration of disciplinary knowledge with students' lived realities. The presentation also foregrounds assessment for justice as essential to equity and calls for systemic institutional support to enable this renewal, even amidst the dire conditions that currently undermine teaching learning assessment. And on that note, Aslam, over to you. We are looking forward to listening to you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. Let me start my clock. I've got 30 minutes, and I'm also trying to upload my slides. Hopefully it will come. So good afternoon, colleagues. It's really nice for me to be able to speak to you today. I just want to, in Professor Richard Stevens, the DVC Teaching Learning's absence, say thank you to him, and also to you, Dr. Nicoline Herman, as well as Darlene Hubert for really organizing all of this so wonderfully well. So thank you very much for this. I also want to just acknowledge Professor Anas Bayaga, who heads up artificial intelligence and education in the Faculty of Education. So thank you very much. Look, I'm going to take you through a number of slides here. Please bear with me. So let me say that the topic I've changed somewhat. It's called Reorientating the Classroom in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. I'm trying to click off here. All right, here we go. And by way of starting, let me say that, of course, we all know that Gen AI is reshaping higher education as we speak. It changes how we teach and how knowledge is acquired and how it is assessed. It also exposes deep cracks in higher education, in our higher education systems. And yet our task is kind of clear, right? We are challenged not to let AI hollow out classrooms. That's the charge currently. That's currently potentially happening, and we're worried about that. And we must use this moment to deepen inquiry and to kind of cultivate student agency, sort of counterintuitively, because AI is pressing us in one direction, and yet we have to answer by pressing it in another direction. Let me say that I will have a number of, I will go through three sections. The one is to speak about context, very importantly. Secondly, the heart of the matter. Most of the time we'll speak about pedagogy. And then I'm going to say something about systemic alignment from where I sit. Remember, I am in a faculty, I'm a lecturer, I'm a researcher, and so on and so forth. And so I also want to say something about the system. But let me say that universities are pulled deeper into neoliberal logics for the last 20, 30 years already. Metrics, rankings, audits, etc. That's what we're sitting with. Digital platforms have been with us for the last 30 years, but it's kind of grown in the last 20 years, kind of exponentially. And AI has just taken us into a kind of a different realm, the digital space. In South Africa, of course, these pressures collide with the stark digital inequalities that we're experiencing, and it manifests itself among our students. If Alsdan Rinquist's research with 2023 paper that she published in my book, researching the digital capital of engineering students and humanities students, if that is to tell us anything, we're also sitting with the inequality. The pressing question, therefore, is whether classrooms can still be sites of epistemic inquiry and epistemic redress where knowledge serves transformation rather than reproduction. So me, the question, overall question, overriding question is epistemic redress, right? There's wonderful theorist, Ron Barnett, about whom I've been speaking to about artificial intelligence. He's come across my work and he's been interacting with me about what he thinks I'm doing. So that's good. He speaks about the last 20 years of higher education are super complex. Many of you have read his stuff. Big text logic, profit logic is to drive expansion. Behind this lie hidden costs of labor exploitation. It's kind of amazing what kind of labor is being exploited to set up these AI machinery. Exploitation of $1 a day for labor, itinerant labor that gets in Kenya, for example, and the amount of pollution and water that's being used to set up data centers is absolutely amazing. So we think we're just clicking and so on, but it's much, much, much more complicated than that. So yes, access to technology in higher education has grown. And it's been with us for the last 40 years. Remember, when I entered university in the mid-1980s, at the University of the Western Cape was put into a Plato digital center where we had to do touchscreen work connected to our psychology teaching. So 40 years, yeah. And many students, however, live with fragile access to devices and fragile and data limits and uneven digital skills. And Gen AI risks widening this gap into a gulf, into an enormous gulf. And universities have mostly responded with bans, with panic, or with amorphousness and vague outlines, short-term fixtures, and so on and so forth. But I believe that what we needed are frameworks and communities of practices grounded in inclusive knowledge traditions that widen access and give all students a place in shaping their future. We have to engage in critical pushback in this realm. This means naming what's hidden, the labor behind the platforms, the environmental toll that's taken up and the profits that big tech is extracting. If universities cannot do one thing, universities ought to do one thing well and just develop a language of critique for what's going on here. And then classrooms must center students' intellectual capacity and agency to resist this kind of institutional and personal capture. However, as the slide shows, critique alone is not enough. In fact, I develop a medium level position where I say that the critique must be embedded in constructive use. So, you know, if you critique this and you can end up in a position where you can't see the wood from the trees and you can't move productively forward. So I favor the critique must result in a kind of a constructive embeddedness. And therefore, we must turn to pedagogy, to the what and to the how of teaching. So this is my second dimension, the transition to the internals of pedagogy. That's where the debate is. Very little in the literature as well as in popular parlance amongst lecturers and so on at universities is being spoken of. At UNESCO, very little is spoken about. When you operate in an AI-infused pedagogical world, speak to the internal logic, the internal dynamics of teaching and learning, not the external pressures, not the etc. and so on and so forth. So that's for me with the real work for building what I'm calling epistemic depth, intellectual depth is all about. So I frame it through 6 foundations. I draw on a tradition of multiliteracies that is about 40 to 50 years old. So all of the literature comes out of that, which reminds us that literacies are always multimodal, not just written, right? In the dominant frame, we're limited to, and we're trapped in a sense by the fact that we view literacies as written and as scripted and so on, but not as multimodal. It's not going to be as sound, as tech, as performance and so on. And that is what this tradition tells us. It is always socially situated within different modes of expression, right? But let me immediately say that AI turns pedagogy upside down. And we have to navigate this pedagogy. And what I mean here, so if some of you know what this Bloom taxonomy frame is, it starts from facts, it moves to application, it moves to synthesis, moves right up to creativity, and it moves up that sequence, up that line from the lowest to the top. Bloom's taxonomy, AI turns this around actually. AI provides you polished content right at the top and no scaffolding to get there. And that's the problem. So when students turn in these very polished essays, they turn it in because AI allows them through a prompt to produce a polished essay that expresses a Bloom right at the top. So it's right at the top, it's turned around. And so we're faced with a kind of a harebrained how of pedagogy and learning. How do you scaffold if students present to you an AI-produced essay right at the top? So, colleagues, it is harebrained in another sense. What I'm going to now take you through are six conceptual foundations that may end up being more confusing than anything else, harebrained in that sense. So I'm asking you to hold on to your hats and your kufiatsis and your dukkies, please. And so let's talk. Here's the 6 foundations for rethinking pedagogy in the age of AI. I want to take you through what I'm arguing is epistemic ascent, knowledge building, moving through multi-form literacies, words are important, then speaking about transposable grammar, cyber-social learning, and so on and so forth. So let me take you through this one by one. Right, let's go to the heart of the matter. The first conceptual foundation is epistemic ascent. Definitionally, epistemic ascent is the movement from lived experience into concept development, into application, into deeper knowledge acquisition. So this kind of moving upwards, right? Always moving upwards. And it is about learning being scaffolded. The goal is not recall. Recall sits, Bloom's taxonomy, right at the bottom, right? But it's about critique, reorganization, and so on. So the key here is with the word epistemic, structured disciplinary learning, that ascent, that grows. That has to be at the heart of the matter when we speak about artificial intelligence in and pedagogy, right? So what is epistemic ascent in practice? I'm really kind of reducing this down to kind of practical examples so that we can right across the university system try to understand what is Aslam saying here to me, who am sitting in the medical sciences faculty or to in the theology faculty or in engineering. Does this apply? It applies to all of those. It's scaffolded movement, of course, from experience to concept, from concrete to abstract, from reproduction to critique, and so on, as I've said. Artificial intelligence output serve as a kind of provisional starting point, or it is some kind of starting point for your intellectual epistemic growth, but it's never the destination. The task is to push beyond students beyond reproduction towards critique, generalization, and reorganization. Why does this matter? Epistemic ascent matters because artificial intelligence risks trapping learners at the surface. In other words, if it provides a very polished essay, no scaffolding towards what constitutes that essay, well, you're trapped right there at the surface. You're not making available. You're not opening up the learning. And so students never get to learn. Epistemic ascent is concentrated on building towards abstraction, towards critique of that knowledge, towards creative application, always connected to the concepts that constitute the learning for a particular discipline. It connects to lived knowledge with disciplinary depth. And it affirms students as producers of knowledge. That's the important point. They are producers of knowledge rather than passive consumers of AI-generated text. Let me go to the second conceptual foundation. All three parts of this concept here is important. Multi, many, form, the modes or the forms by which these learning are generated, and literacy is the intellectual conceptual process. All three together, multi-form literacies are the ability to read, to critique, and to create across different forms. And these forms are not just text, not just writing. It is writing, but it's also image, it's sound, its body, and its space. And multi-form literacies occur across these forms. And therefore, pedagogically, when we are in this space, we have to be able to teach how they move across these forms. And I'll speak about transpositional grammar in a second. As I said earlier, literacies are always social, shaped by the specific context, and in this case, by the specific multi-forms in which they take place. No single form carries meaning on its own. No, neither writing, nor script, nor sound, but its meaning operates across all of these forms. Students, therefore, must learn to work with this plurality of forms to navigate digital realities and contribute to civic life. Let me give you some examples here, because this could be that could have been a little bit abstract. For me, it is. It is. An economics essay turned into an infographic, where the shift is from text, the essay, to visual representation, the infographic. And what happens here? You're making knowledge visible and accessible between two different forms, the writing and the visual. A history report, remember you may have done sort of some research in the archive, oral history, you put a report together, right? That's written. You turn it into a podcast. How interesting. You're popularizing what you've just researched. What is the shift here? It is from text, written text, to oral representation, sound. So sound literacy takes a particular form, right? And that's what I mean when I say that it's multiform. It brings this knowledge alive in sound and voice and so on. So the point here is that each shift is a translation from the one form to the other form, but it's more than a translation. It transforms meaning as it moves from the written to the visual, to the sound, to the embodied, and so on and so forth. And this really correlates. My whole point is that the literacies must also culminate into preparing students for the multiform futures that they're living in. They're living in cyberspace, they're living with AI, they're living in material space as they walk through the surfaces, living in families and so on. They are kind of establishing their identities across these. So you have to also teach them the literacies of moving across, right? And what is the key? Why does this matter? Is that multi-literacies matter because artificial intelligence privileges text, the fluency of text, right? But it ignores the other modes of meaning, right? And We therefore have to work across forms to build the conceptual agility, the critique and the creativity of the students to move across. We have to prepare students to navigate these plural digital futures where meaning is always multimodal. It is not simply expressed within scripts and within text. But what is the key about moving from the one form to the other? The key in the literature that I'm reading so vigorously and so confusingly from time to time, is this notion of transposable grammar. Transposable grammar is taken from the language of, or the conceptualization of earlier translanguaging, where language is not simply spoken or written and so on, but language also the mode in which you speak about it, the various accents that you use and the various genres that you use in linguistic terms to move it forward. But in here, transposition means that it is a grammar. Grammar is more than language. Grammar is the intellectual processing, the language processing that you're doing when you are transposing meaning, when you are moving meaning from one mode to the other mode. So as you move it, you recognize what is gained and what is lost. As meaning moves from the one mode to the other mode. So you can very well understand what critical literacies of artificial intelligence literacy, later you may want to argue, what does that mean when we say we are going to mainstream for our students this kind of transpositional grammar literacy, right? So, for example, a summary report that you would have generated, maybe even via AI, turn it into a graph, right? So that is visual. Again, you're transposing it, or a data set, right? Or a policy brief, right? From the summary on health and so on and so forth. So what do we have to get students to learn to ask? What changes? What remains and why? And that's how they build their epistemic agility. In practice, transpositional grammar is about shifting meaning across modes. For example, a health report can be reworked as an infographic. I gave this example before that reframes the knowledge and represents it. Data about children's learning can be turned into a policy brief, as I've said, that changes emphasis and rhetoric from the data about the children, the statistics and so on. Now you're putting it into a policy brief and you have to transpose that. Each mode has its own logic of meaning making. Students learn that it is not transfer, which it is, but it is transformation of the knowledge and meaning making that you are contending with. So why is this important? Students need agility in the face of AI getting them to reproduce surface knowledge, polished essays, decontextualized essays, and so on. We have to encourage students to challenge that. They need the agility, the ability to move meaning across forms. This builds reflection on how knowledge is transformed, not just repeated or reproduced. It prepares them for, as I've said earlier, complex living. Then, once based on those three earlier ones, the three previous ones, the conceptual foundation here, called cyber-social learning, is really to explain, and the only way I can think about it is if this left hand of mine is cyber and this one is social, how they come together at the point at which they come together to constitute the learning between the two. I mean, the one thing that I have to say is that all of us are doing this. We are all engaging with digital machines, with artificial intelligence. In some or other way, we are, and we're bringing it together, and we're meeting our own human agency for learning. And it is at that intersection of where my fingers meet, that is the surface at which this learning takes place. Okay, I'm saying that in kind of visually incongruent ways, but cyber-social learning is where AI's fluency meets human meaning making. So the literature tells us that we have to understand what is the so-called learning that the cyber AI does, right? And it's a complicated process about how large language models, statistically driven, prompted by tokens, and probabilistic reasoning is prompted by you, and it puts it to work, and it produces you statistically driven logic, that approximates what you want to answer with a whole host of potentials and problems in what it produces. It hallucinates, it gets the facts wrong, it produces you polished and so on and so forth, but it produces powerful text, right? But when it meets the human intellectual processing, the human brings interpretation, dialogue, cultural literacy, ethical understanding, contextual application into it, and it meets human critique. And that is where it comes together. I think that when one speaks about learning in the age of AI, it is at that very tension and that very interface that we have to kind of understand what's going on here, right? In practice, we say this, cyber-social learning treats AI as a prompt, not the end. You prompt the machine, human beings engage. Engineering students takes an AI draft and they critique it. They produce a diagram and they produce a prototype. Literature students exposes silences in AI-produced themes on a particular literary essay, for example, on characters, and so on. And they are able to build counter-narratives. They are able to analyze the morality of the tale. They're able to understand how narratives are part of power relations and narratives part of ethical processes and so on and so forth. Public health students turn an AI-generated report into a campaign. There's intellectual processing that's going on that brings a human criticality. So across fields, human criticality is important in redesign. Why does this matter? Well, cyber-social learning matters because it resists the hollowing of education. If we are mesmerized by the cyber, we will not bring our critical capacity into it. Students should not just consume AI output. They would be expected to interrogate and redesign them. Do we? We have to that kind of work makes students co-creators of knowledge. It builds depth and it builds justice and it builds the agility to live in AI-shaped futures. So that brings me to what the literature calls design-based pedagogy. This is where students design knowledge artifacts. The process is to move from knowledge reproduction, you're producing content. That process is problematized to knowledge making. You're always thinking, you're always critiquing throughout the process. The focus, therefore, is on process, not the product. You can see where this is going as far as assessment is concerned. Assessment is embedded in the learning process. It's not at the end. It's not summative. It is part of the knowledge-making process. So this design-based pedagogy cultivates creativity, agency, and justice, and so on. Just give you an example in practice. In law, you could start with a case summary. You could build, again, an infographic timeline. You could develop a literacy for defending that case, and then you could write a reflective essay, right? And so the point here that one makes is that that learning happens. Where are we now? Let me go back. That learning happens throughout the process. In teacher education, you can take an AI-generated lesson plan, which some of my students are doing at the moment. You could have them redesign it for multilingual classrooms, the very multilingual class that they are teaching in KMNandi, right? And you can ask them to use multimodal resources. And all along that process is a design pedagogy, staging and knowledge making. In public health, the same. And so same cycle every time. You make, you critique, you get feedback, and you redesign so that learning is a process and not a product. Why does this matter? It matters because it focuses on process, not product. It cultivates creativity and it equips students to adapt and thrive in the context that we're in. Right? Accompanying that, obviously, is to ask the question about assessment. This is the $1 million. At the moment, we are confounded by assessment, right? But why change assessment? Well, old school tests and essays reward surface recall and reproduction, knowledge content recall. In the age of AI, these tasks are fragile, can easily be bypassed by generative AI tools. And that is why the confoundment with assessment. This is what's confronting us at the moment. Assessments that is knowledge production based, for which students cleverly and disguisingly use generative tools to produce very fluent answers that flummoxes us when we read it and we ask ourselves, wat het nou hier aangegaan? What happened? Worse, assessment has come to overshadow pedagogy rather than support it. So the point is that it's got to support it, right? It's got to be a new logic that aligns assessment with deep learning. So if old assessment is broken, what's the alternative? With assessment for design, the focus shifts from product to process. Students create knowledge artifacts, critique them, get feedback and redesign. And AI can help with all of this, with formative feedback. Learner analytics is being used in many instances very, very creatively. Human judgment must ensure nuance, justice, and inclusion, so that in this way, assessment becomes an integral part of learning itself, cultivating agency and depth, and so on. Assessment in practice, maybe some examples. In STEM subjects, students might translate findings across modes, from experiments to reports and visuals or videos. Historians can review AI-generated drafts, they can critique them, they can reconstruct them into more comprehensive narratives, assessment throughout. Business students can reframe the same analysis for marketing for different audiences. The process is the same: depth, adaptability, and critical literacy. Things AI alone cannot deliver. Assessment is thus embedded in learning. Right. So, coming close to the end, I suggested these pedagogical foundations, what I've mentioned, matter because AI tips us into surface learning, knowledge reproduction, smooth essays, no learning. But these foundations, design pedagogy foundations, push us instead towards depth and critique and creativity. They tie pedagogy to justice, to epistemic pluralism, and so on. And they equip students with agency to reshape their futures. Pedagogy, however, cannot stand alone. So let me just go to the third dimension, and that is the system. I focused on 3 dimensions. I propose some short-term mitigation, secondly, some medium-term integration to align, and thirdly, some long-term systemic change. First is a short-term mitigation. Universities need guardrails, right? They need them, and they need them yesterday. The goal is not panic bans, but to set sensible boundaries while making space for deeper reform and to address the immediate risk of AI misuse. So clear policies, AI policies are needed. Clear guidance must be offered, and AI student and staff immersion or training, whatever, should be effected very, very quickly. The medium term is to integrate AI into the system. Universities must build AI capacity and embed critical literacy across curricula. That notion of embedding critical literacy, not critical AI literacy in this, but critical literacy that understand how transpositions work, that understand how multiform literacies are acquired, that understand how cybersocial learning works, how design pedagogy works, and how design assessment works. The literacy is around all of that, right? So assessment should move to process and creativity. We have to adapt our university's learning management systems. Our son learned for design pedagogy and assessment. Currently, it's kind of a curation of knowledge reproduction. And I've seen some examples about how they become part of the design learning management process. Research-led communities of practices, I think there's a lot of stuff happening in different faculties I've come to discover. But I think we need a kind of a frame that holds us together. I'm not suggesting mine, but potentially mine, potentially kind of along the way I'm speaking about. But we have to establish communities of practice inside of our faculties departments across the co-curricular program. Otherwise, people are going to flounder in the atomistic engagement one at a time and so on and so forth. And we are never going to bring this to critical mass. And we have to design policies for innovation. Long-term transformation that we have to break with the neoliberal logics that turn universities into compliance machines. We have to move from a clearing of the forest towards the clearing in the forest that provides the light. And I'm mangling a metaphor here that I've read in a paper by Darlene and Nicolene and Hanley, the chapter that they've just published. So AI must be a scaffold, never a substitute. And our intellectual architectures must be redesigned, shifting from reproduction towards design and creativity. That is the long term, but the long term starts now. It is clear that renewal needs balance based on integration and guidance from the top and innovation from the ground up. AI makes this balance urgent. The enormity of the task is evident. Inequalities and digital divides cannot be ignored. Yet, universities can and should advance justice and prepare students for critical futures. And to conclude, colleagues, AI has unsettled higher education in an enormously profound way. But it's also opened a new kind of horizon, arduously, anxiously, and yet it's there. The foundations that I've provided is one way of thinking about developing depth. Our task is to cultivate critical and creative ethical citizens for complex futures. And teaching must be at the center. with students' critical citizenship and the public good as our horizon. This point about placing teaching at the center is a critical point that I would like to argue at some point. People are saying, what about the research? Anyway, that is how we reclaim the future in the age of AI. Colleagues, thank you very much for your indulgence here. I've taken a little bit longer than what I should have, but much appreciated.
Thank you very much, Prof Fataar. I also give my real clapping of my hands, not only the virtual one, but you see there's a lot of claps going on.
Thank you.
Well, I've got many questions, but I'm sure colleagues have got many questions or comments. So I think the first one that I saw online was my colleague Wade. I don't know whether you have a question, Wade, or whether it's just a comment. If you would like to switch on your microphone and ask or comment, you're welcome.
No, hello. Hi,
Hello, Wade.
Sorry, no, it wasn't a question. It was actually more of a comment. I was just really taken aback by the statement about turning Bloom's taxonomy upside down and how AI has in fact forced that upon us. So now we are forced to cultivate interdisciplinary fluency when we work within the higher education space. Like, I just really like the fact that you said that, because I'd never thought of that before. So it was more of a comment and me just thinking out loud.
Thank you so much, Wade. I see your hand, Susan, but I'm just going to give Marinette an opportunity. Marinette, if you would like to ask your question.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Prof Fataar, for a very engaging and interesting talk. I'm in the journalism department, so that is where my question about the skills needed to teach students, or to, maybe not teach is the right word, even to guide students into this multimodal learning ecosystem. It does require some technical skills, because you cannot assume all students know how to make podcasts, although you can make that these days online as well with Notebook LLM and things like that. But it would require us as lecturers to also be aware of the tools and what is possible, and how do you judge an infographic? How do you evaluate? How do you scaffold learning when it's multimodal learning? And my question would just be, do you think we'll get everybody on board with this? Because I think, it's an old tune of mine that it's always the same people in the room when we talk about teaching, learning, assessment. And these are not the people who are not thinking about teaching, learning, assessment. So how do you get everybody on board to realize that they have to, and I see my colleague, Ms. Govender, also says that we are all living in this media life. We are all living in a mediated life. But I think that what I'm really trying to get at is, are we going to have to upskill the lecturers in different ways, not just technically, but just in a way of thinking before we can actually implement this with students? It's actually too late to do that now. Yeah. Sorry, bit of all over the place.
Sure. Nicolene, can I respond to both of those comments?
Yes, please. Please go.
Thanks.
Continue.
Okay, those are lovely comments. Wade, I can share an article with you where this argument is made in a very, very serious way. It's not simply metaphorical. The idea that the Bloom's taxonomy is turned around. I mean, if you think about it, that this cyber AI produces these fluent, creative outputs right at the top of the Bloom's taxonomy process, and it bypasses everything else, right? And so the intellectual process is to almost, I told my wife Nadia this morning that perhaps we should then have the intellectual process scaffold downwards, upwards. Right? So AI produces, right? So use the AI product that the students will provide it, not at the end of the module, but right at the very beginning, and then scaffold the intellectual process and open it up in a kind of a scaffolded way towards the production of that process, so that they can understand what the intellectual processes are that produce that particular. But in that process also unveil the complexities and the difficulties and the hallucinations that AI has done to produce that very polish and the decontextualized outputs that the AI has produced. Inserting, therefore, all along the way, questions of integrity, questions of critical application, questions of ethical use, and all of those important epistemic virtues that is important for that process. So that is a very important point. Secondly, is the point that is made by Dr. Jordan, and this is my issue about centering teaching at the very center. It is so completely obvious that relearning is the domain of every academic in the university. Unlearning and relearning and acquiring critical literacies, including AI-generated literacies, is a requirement for every single person who works in a university setting and who will be teaching students. Because you cannot get into an understanding of how to move forward pedagogically if you don't know the basic stuff about machines, the basic stuff of cyber-social transposition, the multimodalities that's at play, and so on and so forth. Your lecturers are going to be 5 times removed from the students' learning. And that is an exceptionally, that is going to be an exceptionally precarious place for us to be. Just to say that multi-form literacies are not the automatic domain of academics like me, or even like many of us sitting here. We are all script-based knowledge reproduction type academics. That's what we know. We don't know that when the multiform moves transpositionally to a podcast, what is the literacy that constituted the podcast? I mean, what we hear is a beautiful podcast or a terrible podcast, but what is the literacy that constituted, that makes a podcast a bad one or a good one? That's a different literacy. So we have to, all of us, be in this educational space. That is why I'm saying the compulsory immersion of academics is on the table. And last point is, and that is why I said this has to be driven from the center. And it has to be driven fundamentally also, and given your point, Dr. Jordan, that not everyone's interested in this, through innovation, right? So if you and 3 colleagues are doing something, apply a frame. I'm proposing one frame, you apply your own frame about how all of things come together, and implement it, research it, take it to scale, and innovate around it, and make it compelling in the university. However, innovation is not going to get us anywhere if it is not fundamentally integratively driven from the top as well. So it's that top, bottom down process.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Susan, you had your hand up. Please continue.
Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for this very interesting talk. I joined early, then I joined late because of a problem of connection, but I will definitely listen to the recording several times after this. Just to get back to something you said about assessment, that it should not be a once-off but a continuous process, and AI and scaffolding. What is your take on oral defending of a topic rather than just to write it? So if, let's say, AI can produce the report, I am with the language center, so writing is in the center of what we do, so we are feeling the pain. But to me, if a student really engages in a debate, oral defending, so to speak, of their paper or report or take on whatever it is that we are trying to get through to them, whether it's content-based or not, would that be an option maybe to have, like in a doctorate, I could basically take that stupid, not because we're not being, there you have to defend what you have said and nobody can help you there. You have to actually understand what you have written to be able to pass the subject. Just a quick question.
Look, I think a lot of the answer to the question lies in the way you frame the question. So thank you for framing it in that way. So it's all of the above, right? But it's the relation amongst the component parts that's important. And that is what I mean by, that is what the literature means by curating the learning, right? But it's also important for the academic to be in a position to hold what the Bernsteinians call to hold the pedagogical relay and to release it and to find out when to keep, when to develop concepts, when to move the concepts forward, when to assess, how to move from knowledge transfer to knowledge making and so on. So all of these things are still in play. But it is about an understanding about how all of these things sit across the range of knowledge making and learning in front of you. So if you have a knowledge reproduction mode, what you're targeting is end of term learning, and that is where learning is going to culminate. And at the end of which you're going to design an assessment that's going to assess them on the basis of the endpoint of that learning right there. Right? So everything in a sense moves towards that, and the assessment moves towards that. Well, AI has just blown that out of the water. So strategically and also conceptually and principally, the learning must move right across. It must move right from the very start. So if the oral form, the oral expressive form, helps you at a particular point along the range of learning tasks, help you understand how the students are able to acquire different forms of multimodal learning expression across that modal, then the oral comes into play. There are practicalities with regard to that. If you're sitting in a class of 200 and 300, then you may have to, and here is where the learning management system, the learning LMS systems can be utilized. The clicker-based system and so on can be utilized to get the podcast system, the developing of designing, the collaborative learning and so on will allow you to do that better. We just have to bring all of these things into view and into relation to each other to understand how that scaffold will work, because scaffold must always go upwards, how conceptually we must hold on to the discipline that we're doing, but we have to understand it in a much more different way. But we have to just get going and kind of understand how that works right across the course that we're presenting and so on and so forth.
Thank you so much for, sorry.
Thank you. No, thank you. I just wanted to say it makes a lot of sense. Sometimes you ask a question and then when someone who knows more than everybody combined answers, you feel stupid. But thank you so much for that. I appreciate it.
Oh, fabulous. I just wanted to say, you're working in the language lab, and so I'm traditional. I come from the knowledge schools. I still think that writing and reading is key to intellectual work. So please forgive me for that. I just think it's key. However, what I do know is that learning to write and learning to read is not to be conceived of in this old input-output way. There are digital tools and artificial intelligence tools that can help that process along. What we have to guard against is the shortcomings of these tools, and what we have to guard against is that these tools short-circuit the learning process, the learning how to write. But it's all in play. We've got to use it. There are amazing apps and bots that's able to do this. But it's how you hold them.
Thank you so much. Danaya, I see your hand was up next. Please continue.
Hi. Thank you so much. So, in your discussion about moving away from these sort of neoliberal logics, how do you see constructive alignment fitting in? Because, you know, it sort of narrows learning into what we can pre-specify and assess, and it's been so widely adopted. Yeah. It was just a thought that I had while you were speaking about
Okay,
that.
just tell me a little bit more, because I lost the last part of it, so I don't have the context for is what do you mean by constructive alignment?
Okay, so that's sort of popular. Oh, I think it was developed by Biggs, where we need to have really clear learning objectives. We need to communicate them clearly. We need to have a clear rubric that the students have access to before assessments. That sort of.
Yes. The answer to that is yes. The one thing that we cannot afford in this space is to be amorphous and not to be guided by a distinct set of alignments that gets you through the process towards the achievement of something. This is not an amorphous. You're not going to learn anything. You're just going to play. Right? Learning is about acquisition, and acquisition is developed through this process of learning. So the constructive alignment is extremely important. Many people will argue that it's too conservative for this particular space, but I would like to hold onto constructive, as I would like to hold onto the lecturer's pedagogical scaffolding as at the center of all of this. But as someone has just said in the chat, you are going to be challenged to hold up conceptual scaffold if you are unable to understand how artificial intelligence literacy meets human literacy in this particular space. So there's a lot of learning and experimenting and innovating that we have to do.
Thank you. Angela, I see your hand is up.
Thank you, Nicolene. Let me put my camera on. Hello, Prof. Thank you for such an interesting talk.
Thank you.
I would like, a lot of things you said resonate with me. And I think multimodal literacies truly flourish when disciplines intersect, when departments work together on things. I've seen things, for example, visual arts. We talked about how can we judge a podcast, for example, but we can work with communications. Visual arts, media studies do help our students to design products like these. Engineering, for example, also can be involved. Design can be involved. You often see products like this in TVETs, technical and vocational spaces. I'd like to know if you've seen institutional partnerships like this, or collaborations where disciplines have worked together and they've produced or redesigned assessment, redesigned teaching and learning. Have you seen any examples of this in South African higher education?
No, I haven't. But just to extend a little bit on the logic of what you're saying. So when we are obviously in a multi-trans and interdisciplinary space, right? That's first. Multi-form literacy is not multimodal, multi-form. Multimodal, it captures the idea that you can transpose meaning across the modes of learning, whether it is digital learning or script-based learning or classroom learning and so on and so forth. That's one mode. But it's also multi-form, and that is the multi-literacies intellectual processes that's going on there, right? So when you're doing a multi-literacy, multi-form learning, you've got to be acutely aware. This is the critical literacies acquisition that we all as lecturers have to encounter. And this is why I'm in this space. And that is that there are different, when you bring different literacies together and artificial intelligence in relation to it, you have to have an acute sense of how they come together so that you don't collapse the one literacy into the other literacy, so that your pedagogical literacy is able to mobilize a student's learning distinctively across these modes and also how they come together. That's a key. Otherwise, you see everything as the sameness, as the same. So that is also the danger of working in this multi-form space. Everything becomes amorphously the same. The literacy is to pixelate is to separate them, is to understand how the literacies work across the different forms, what constitute a podcast literacy, and then to move them together. And that some of these literacies in the hard sciences will work differently and less space, but yet will work differently to visual arts. Visual arts is almost constituted by that multimodal literacy forms. That is, in a sense, what so like design-based engineering and so on requires of you. You have to have that applied literacy that moves from the disciplinary learning to the applied learning to the learning of how to build a bridge in the cross sands of Kayamandi, for example. Right? So you cannot. So it is not a populist collapsing. It is holding them up to understand the logics that you bring together when you move that together. And for me, that is where the excitement is. Artificial intelligence helps all along the way, but it helps in a particular kind of way. The human creativity brings the learning to the human in a particular kind of a way as well. So it is all very sophisticated in my mind, at least, very complicated in my mind, maybe not in yours, but it's also moments of research. So this must be research-based, innovation-led communities of practice to come together who try stuff and write about their failures, right? And that becomes the moving this to scale. And the center must hold. If the center doesn't hold, what's going to happen, right?
Yeah, Prof, can I just add to that? Sorry, Nicolene. I think at the
Yeah.
heart of it is actually keeping track of and clarity on it. You have to have transversal literacies. You want to see critical thinking, analytical thinking, creative,
Transpositional. I don't like that word
transpositional.
transversional.
Oh, okay. I'll come back to you on that one. Yes, at the heart of this, that's what you're looking at, scaffolding and building.
Yeah.
And that's what you're looking for evidence of in different fields. And that's what industries look for too.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. Okay. Thanks, Prof. Appreciate that.
Much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to use the fact that I now have the mic and just link back to what you said about the community of practice. So do you perhaps have a suggestion as to a way forward with creating or establishing or a community of practice at the university or around a specific topic, etc.?
Yes, look, I think that I have come across a number of individual lecturers doing great stuff, right? And I think that kind of individual innovativeness have to be augmented by 2 or 3 people coming together and doing it together. In answering a particular question that rips open their interest, that cuts into a complex issue in relation to their own teaching. To develop a literature that supports that, to develop a set of frames that move us forward here, to make sure that student learning is at the center of that, to make sure that this inequality and this division by which students acquire their digital literacy and deploy their digital literacy in their learning is a central part of that, all of the above. In other words, the first answer to a question, Dr. Herman, is root what we do in a conceptual grammar and a literacy that's skrikvinniks. Read yourself into this, to undergird yourself with a conceptualization of the literature that will position you here. Quite apart from the fact that AI takes us away from our reading, I think read, and then do, that's important. That's the first thing. Secondly, I think in each faculty, we have to seed 3 or 4 people coming together to hold the space, so that when they do it together, they can share their learnings across the different learnings. And then in the university, from wherever, I'm not going to say where, I have ideas, this process can be cohered, right? So it can be cohered so that we move it to scale across the university. So the whole point about communities of practice is to move it to scale and to find the systemic modality, not properly used word modality, the systemic infrastructure to move it to scale across the university. So I'm not really answering your question, but I'm suggesting that we have to use the ground up innovation, systematize it, moving it to scale, and research led and incentive led. We've got to incentivize this process as well. Curriculum CTL does this via their various programs, the pre-DAC program, the program, what is the program called, where you give amounts of money for innovative teaching and so on. It's that kind of process.
Thank you so much. And if my colleagues would like to come in here, I think we have a few of these ideas already germinating here and there.
Yeah.
So maybe my question to the group here, we're 38 left in here. If we send out invitations for people to join some of the groups that are already busy or establishing new groups, answering specific questions, whether everybody in the room would be in for joining such discussion groups, communities, all of that. Also within the different faculties. Thank you so much. Yes, as I said, I know that my colleagues are busy with some of it. Also as part of a big assessment project running at the university, including AI. So I don't know whether Hanley or Emma, if you in 1 minute would like to say something perhaps and confirm the invitation. I don't know whether you're still in here because I see we're almost at the end of our time.
I'm still here, Nicolene Hanley here.
Thank you, Hanley.
Yes, hello, Aslam. It was fantastic. Thank you. You make me think. That's why I haven't asked lots of questions. I have to think a little bit more. But yes, I think we would like to head in the same direction. Some kind of more something happening on a larger scale. And I like what you suggested, starting with smaller communities or larger communities of practice with smaller groups and faculties that then can scale across. And from the assessment project, we're looking at trying some of these things. Just watch your inboxes for invites in the next few weeks. I think that's maybe enough to say for now, Nicolene, while I ponder all of this.
Thank you so much, Hanley. Last one then, Ms. Paulson, I see your hand is up.
Juliet.
Apologies, that was by mistake, but I just wanted to comment if that's okay.
Yes.
It's very exciting. I'm always thinking about, we talk about collaborative practice and all that stuff. And my concern is that sometimes it isn't, sure, for lack of a better word, academia does not kind of lean itself to togetherness in a sense, because your PhD is an individual journey. Research seems to be very individual. I mean, there is obviously people that write together and that sort of thing. But even in the way that it's set up, it kind of, for me, well, this is why this is exciting. It kind of sets us up for just focusing on the competitive nature, which is not a bad thing. But I sometimes wonder if that can be a hindrance in terms of collaborative work. Sometimes somebody always wants to be on the top because of the hierarchical nature of academics and academia. So that's always my concern in the back of my head. I'm very much for collaborative practice, absolutely. But I just think in the terms of the practicality, I've not seen that happen really in these spaces. And so maybe even I have some ideas of possibly collaborating on PhD work as well, moving forward, wherever that will look like as well. But yeah, that's just a question I have that's always in the back of my head about real collaboration. Really, I think grappling with things together, not as competitors, but as collaborators and friends in academia.
Sure. Hi. Can I continue, Nicolene?
Yes.
Nicolene, yes. Now look. Yes. Juliet. That is an enormous problem in the neoliberal age. We are atomized in various ways. At Stellenbosch University, we're atomized around old and new lines as well.
That's good.
Speaks to institutional culture.
Yeah.
Right. Institutional culture, in some environments, the institutional culture would be better than others, and that depends on leadership.
Yeah.
Right. And so if you are in an institutional environment that doesn't necessarily brook this kind of institutional culture, you've got to force the ground, right?
Yeah.
And you got to get together with 2 or 3 of your friends and force the conversation and establish something and put it in the face and argue for a better institutional dispensation. I mean, you can very well hear how Nicolene and Hanley are making the collaborative effort from their sides. Make the connection to them immediately and tell them,
Okay.
this is what we're doing, this is what we want to do, this is what we're reading, this is what we're thinking, this is what we're confused about. Can you help us? Can we help you? It is that kind of institutional culture that often, if it doesn't exist, doesn't help.
Yeah.
But it also requires of us to move across. And so already in the 2 or 3 things that have been said here, there is an opening for us to move across. Jump at it. Force the change that you need to see happening.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Colleagues, at this point, we need to greet each other. And from my side, just Aslam, thank you very much for an inspiring and thought-provoking talk, and also for the fact that you gave some practical examples and things that one could ponder upon. So thank you very much. And everybody in the room, check your inboxes, as Hanley said. So let us see that we can all work together and see where we can get the institution to go with AI. And yeah, it's an exciting time. And thank you for all the bright minds in the room. We're really looking forward to working together. All the best and have a good afternoon.
Thank you,
you.
Hanli. Thank you,
Appreciate it.
Prof.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Aslam.
Thank you very much, Celine. Thank you, Nicolene. Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye-bye.